Hello and welcome to the first of a series of webinars that we're delivering on behalf of East Sussex Council to support providers in the early years sector in taking themselves through the process of business planning. I'll say more about the other workshops towards the end of this workshop. In the meantime, my name is Jacqui Burke and my business Flourishing People has specialised in delivering business and management training for the early years and childcare sector for many years. And I'm also the author of Building Your Early Years Business, and many of the tips that I will be covering with you today are covered in that book. So without further ado, this is the aim of this webinar. It will provide you with an overview of the kind of process that you should be using for business planning. And that's the same whether you're a brand new startup provider or whether you've been in business for many years. And the aim of business planning obviously is to ensure that you are in the future more sustainable. So that's where we're going to focus today. So as soon as we start talking about business planning within any sector, we need to think about the environment within which we're operating. And our context is complex. You know, the world is a complicated place in which to run a business. We're obviously still dealing with the impact of COVID and will be for, I suspect, many years to come. But we also, within our sector, need to consider other elements of our context as well. So some of the ongoing things that have been with us for some years continue to cause us issues and challenges, things like the level of government funding, take up of 30 hours places, the whole sufficiency issue, austerity measures that have caused local authorities to have to cut certain services that were once provided free of charge to providers, possible impacts of Brexit that we're really just starting to see. And most recently, I haven't even updated the slide to consider this, the impact of everything that's happening in the Ukraine as I am recording this webinar. So we need to be thinking about all of those things when we start to think about business planning within an early years business. So to help us to kind of navigate our way through all of this, I think about this often as being on a journey in a car. And I don't know about you, but I'm pretty reliant these days. If I'm going anywhere where there's, you know, it's likely to be a fairly complex journey, I'm pretty reliant on my Sat Nav. What I recommend to you is that you develop a business Sat Nav that will help you to plan your business journey in the same way as planning a physical journey in a car. So some of the things that help a Sat Nav to work, we'll talk about as I go through the course of this webinar, and you'll see kind of why I make that kind of analogy. Very helpfully to assist us with this process, our good friends at Hempsells have put together a really fabulous toolkit to help you on your business journey. This toolkit, which is called the Hempsells Business Mapping Process, you will find on the C-Zone. All of the tools that I'm going to talk about today and in the other webinars are there and available for you to access. And these are all tools that will help you through that planning process. And as the quote says there on the screen, help you to find your route through the changes that need to be made, taking your business forward into the future. You'll also find that I'm referring to a number of key tools that East Sussex has put together. So they have in particular put together a business plan template, which is also available on the C-Zone. And what you'll find is that the headings that are included in that business plan template include all the vital information that an early years setting should be thinking about including in a business plan. And it really gives you a good understanding and insight into how a childcare business operates, the key factors that you need to be focusing your attention on in order to ensure that you're operating sustainably. So I will be encouraging you at the end of today's webinar that you actually sit down and have a go at using the Hempsells tools and using the East Sussex business plan template with your colleagues, managers, owners, committee members, etc., for your own setting. So where do we begin? So let's come back to my Sat Nav idea. So before a Sat Nav will work, we obviously need to program some information into it, don't we? And the information that we program into it is where we're trying to get to. So we put the destination in there. And it's very similar in a business context. So if our business plans are going to be helpful in us navigating our business journey, then we need to be clear where we're trying to get to. And in business terms, that means setting out our goals. So it's really important sometimes that you take a step back and just do a bit of thinking about, well, where are we going? Where are we trying to get to in terms of the future of our early years business? So what are our goals? Do we have clear goals about the impact that we want to make on the children that attend our setting? Do we have clear goals about the impact that we want to make on the parents that we work with and on perhaps our local community? Do we have clear goals about the kind of early years business that we want to be, that we want to grow into, to develop into in the future, or to maintain? So if you haven't done so recently, that's a really good conversation to have as a management team or as a committee. Sit down and have that conversation and capture some of those thoughts. And again, just like with your Sat Nav in your car, you can kind of just put generally where you're trying to get to. So if I want to get to Cambridge, for example, well, my Sat Nav would get me somewhere in Cambridge, but it wouldn't necessarily get me exactly where I want to get to. So just as in the same way, our business goals will get us somewhere in the vicinity, but if we want them to be more helpful for us, then what we need to do is be a bit more precise. So this is the business equivalent to putting a postcode into your Sat Nav. So this is about then smartening up, being more specific about your business goals. So we need to be thinking quite strategically. So we need to be thinking about the big picture, long-term things here. And we need to be thinking quite aspirationally and inspirationally, and think about outcomes for the business as well as for parents and for children, and making sure that it's smart. So this is our equivalent of the postcode. I'm sure you've come across SMART before as a mnemonic, and you're probably thinking it in your head now, but I'm not going to test people. So here's a little reminder of what SMART stands for. So when we set our business goals, we need to be really specific. We need to make sure that they are measurable, and that's often the most challenging part of actually setting objectives. We need to ensure that it feels achievable, because if it doesn't feel achievable, then it's not going to be very motivating. We need to make sure it's realistic, that we've put the mechanisms in place for making sure that we can actually achieve those goals, and obviously make sure that we put some timescales and some deadlines, and avoid saying things like as soon as possible, because we all know that never really happens. So let's just have a look at what that might look like actually in real practical terms. So here's some examples of some general goals, and then beneath each of them, an example of how you'd actually turn it into a SMART objective. So you might have a general goal to be more sustainable, which is fine, but then to make that really useful, to make that goal something that you can actually manage against, you need to smarten it up. So you might want to say very specifically, to end the financial year, that gives it timescale to end the financial year with a profit exceeding X amount of pounds. So what you've done there is you've made it specific. It's not just thinking about sustainability generally. It's very much about making a profit. You've made it measurable. So you can measure that you've actually generated X amount of profit, because you'll be able to look at your bank statement and see whether that's the case, and look at your financial statements. And we've made it time bound by saying it's in the current financial year. So we'll obviously be measuring this at the end of the current financial year and within year. Okay, so hopefully that feels achievable. Obviously, you'd need to make sure that, you know, exceeding X amount of pounds is actually a realistic and achievable target. So the second one, we might have a goal of generally improving our reputation locally. But what does that actually look like in terms of something you can manage? Because that's a bit airy-fairy, isn't it? So we might say to achieve 80% average occupancy over the course of the next 12 months. So that's very specific. It's measurable because we can measure our occupancy, and it's time bound. So it's over the course of the next 12 months. And I think that probably sounds quite achievable as well. So we're not saying we want it 80% every single month, and we're not saying we want it to be 80% next month when we're only on 30% at the moment, which would be perhaps unachievable. Okay, and then the final one, we might have an aspiration generally to expand our provision. But what does that actually look like in terms of turning that into a plan? So we might want to state that we want to grow from a 14-place setting offering sessional provision to a 24-place setting offering full-time provision, and we want to achieve that by the end of July 2022, 23, whatever year you want to put in there. Okay, so does that give you an idea, I hope, of how you actually take those more general kind of goals and aspirations and actually turn them into a SMART objective, which is then something that you can actually plan for and manage against. So that's your first step in terms of creating your Sat Nav. And then you're ready to head off on your journey. But hang on a minute. I don't know about you, but before I head off on a big journey, I do a little bit more than just putting it in my Sat Nav. I probably turn on the radio, and I probably have a look on social media and see what's going on in the world around me. So back to our business journey. You know, we're in a world where there's a lot of volatility and uncertainty and ambiguity, and, you know, a lot of these sort of things could go on that can actually be happening thousands of miles away. But by golly, do they have an impact on us running a business in the UK? Yes, very much so. You look at, you've only got to look at COVID, which started around the other side of the world in China, and look at the huge impact that's had on us. So in my car journey scenario, I'd probably look at the weather forecast, and I'd probably look at where there's any roadworks. And I'd probably, nearer the time, just check that there hasn't been a big accident on the motorway or something of that sort that might actually prevent me from getting to my destination. So we do the same in a business sense. And we make sure that we check our facts carefully. So it's really important that we base our business planning on facts, not fiction. So don't just go on the basis of hearsay. And particularly when new rules and regulations come out, it's very easy to look at Facebook and see what people are saying about it on Facebook. And sometimes that's a load of old rubbish. So it's much better to check the actual facts for yourself if you're going to base a business plan on that piece of information. So I'm going to now share with you a couple of business planning tools, and show you where some of this thinking all fits together. And these business planning tools effectively build your Sat Nav for you, for your business to follow. And the basic tool that we're going to use is something called a SWOT analysis, which I'm sure many of you have come across before, and you'll find in the Sussex business plan template that it asks you to include a SWOT analysis. This is basic good business practice. So a SWOT analysis just gives us those 4 important headings and asks us to think about what are our strengths, what are the things we're really good at, in other words, what are our weaknesses, so what are the things that we're not so good at, what are the opportunities that are out there that are things that perhaps we're not doing at the moment that we could take advantage of, and what are the potential threats, what are the risks, what are the things that could happen to us that could derail us as a business. So starting then looking at that outside view, what we've just been talking about in terms of what's going on in the world around us, those things that very often we kind of, you know, we look at the news, but we don't think about them in terms of implications for our business. And the tool that we use to help us to think about those sort of things is called a pestle analysis. And a pestle analysis works from the point of view of looking from where you are, looking outside of your business at all of the various factors that could have an impact on your early years business, and just looking at those things under those 6 headings. So I'm going to briefly show you an example of a completed pestle analysis, and you'll find a copy of the completed one actually on the C-Zone. So if you want to look at it in more detail, you can do. And it ends up looking a bit like this. So under political, you might want to think about, well, what's happening in terms of local politics, what's happening in terms of national politics, and what's happening in terms of international global politics, because certainly some of those things can have a considerable impact on us here. I'm just thinking about some of the terrible conflicts that are happening around the world that end up having an impact on us. Under the economic heading, again, you might want to think about it in terms of those different layers, and in particular, what's happening in your local economy. So are you in an area where things are booming, where there's a lot of inward investment coming into your area, or actually are you in an area which is economically quite deprived, where people are struggling to make ends meet? And then it's important to think about the national economy. So some of the things it's important to think about there are things like, you know, the impact that Brexit is having on prices and on the availability of goods, the impact that higher rates of inflation are suddenly starting to have on us in terms of our costs increasing at a much faster rate than we've been used to for well over a decade. And things like government decisions about things like increasing national minimum wage and the impact that has on your wage bills and your pension contributions and things of that sort. So thinking about your local and the national economy is really important. Under the social heading, the S heading, this is a good place to think about the ways in which society is changing. And we've seen massive changes over the last couple of years or so because of COVID, where our working patterns for most people have changed. We've had a lot more people working from home. For a lot of businesses, they will continue to do some sort of hybrid working. And that's changed a lot of families' thoughts about their childcare needs going forward. We've got the changes to our population resulting from Brexit and immigration changes. So for a lot of settings that were previously easily able to recruit EU staff, that's become extremely difficult. And we don't know what that will look like going forward. We've got the arrival of families from different parts of the world, often as a result of conflict and uncertainty there. So we've had Afghan, I'm sure in your area, you've had Afghan families come into the area. We've had Syrian families. We've probably got families from Hong Kong coming, and we may have families from the Ukraine coming as well. And these are often children and families with very complex needs. that take a lot of our consideration. We may have some positives happening locally, socially. We may have new housing developments, which creates a demand for additional childcare, obviously. So we've got all of those factors to think about. Under the T heading, the technological heading, we need to think about the shift to doing so much more online. You know, we're inevitably, we can do very little without having good online technology. So the days of running a setting on paper and pencil are long gone. Parents expect to be able to access our services online. That might be through bookings, it might be through invoicing, it might be through making payments, it might be through receiving updates by social media, etc. Government expects us to deal with them online through electronic returns and things like making tax digital. Tax-free childcare scheme, the whole scheme is accessed online, so we've had no choice but to deal with that. And a lot of our training increasingly, like this, is provided online. Once upon a time, I'd have probably been delivering this to you face to face. And obviously being online a lot more, that throws up quite a lot of risks in terms of things like e-safety and cybersecurity, and having to keep hardware and software up to date, and there are cost implications for that. And just the whole issue about access to online services. If you're in a part of the county where it's very rural and perhaps your internet isn't as reliable and as fast and stable as other areas. Under the L heading, the legal heading, it's about keeping an eye on things that are new or things that are changing, as well as keeping an eye on existing regulations. So we've already got things like DBS checks and GDPR, and they create some admin, don't they? And then there might be regulatory changes around things like pediatric first aid and food safety and data protection and all that kind of stuff. And we're constantly having to keep ourselves up to date with those sort of things. And then you've got the whole Ofsted environment. They update their inspection framework every so often and their inspection handbook. So keeping an eye on their current expectations is absolutely essential to us. And then there are more general national rules, like rules around who we can employ and who we can have as self-employed members of our team. So where things change nationally as a result of changes to employment law, we need to keep an eye on those as well. And then finally, the E is about environmental changes. And here, obviously, we need to think about our different levels. So what's happening in our very local environment where our setting is occupying a premises, what's happening in the national environment, and what's happening obviously global in terms of climate change and the impact that that's having on all of us in terms of our weather conditions. So we do need to be thinking about these sort of things in terms of weather, in terms of the sustainability of our premises, in terms of costs such as insuring our premises, costs such as the costs of utility bills that are reliant on fossil fuels, waste disposal costs for things like nappy disposal and commercial waste and things of that sort. And then there are some of the great opportunities that parents are perhaps increasingly thinking about, more outdoor activity, particularly post-COVID. So things like forest school activities have become particularly popular and things of that sort. So this is what a typical pestle analysis might look like, but really important, don't just take this generic one. Think about some of those factors for yourself and for your own situation, because where you are locally may be different from where I am based up here in Suffolk. So having done your pestle analysis, what do you do with it? Well, it's all very interesting and you could just kind of stick it in a drawer, but actually this has a really important use. And the important use is then to ask yourself two key questions. And our two key questions are these. So you will have seen some of the things in that pestle analysis present some really good opportunities for the future. So I mentioned things like new housing developments and forest schools and things of that sort. So ask yourself, what are the most significant opportunities for your setting over the coming years that you've shown on your pestle analysis? And then what should we be doing now, today, in order to ensure that we're ready to take advantage of those opportunities? And your second question is the opposite of that. So many of the things that come up on a pestle analysis are typically seen as threats or risks. So ask yourself, which of these are the most significant? Don't try and tackle all of them at once because it's a bit overwhelming, but which are the real biggies that actually are likely to happen? And if they do, they're likely to cause us considerable difficulty. And what should we be doing now, today, in order to try and mitigate or reduce the impact that those threats might have on our business? And those are things that then you're going to build into your SWOT analysis in the opportunities and the threats section. So I'm going to move on then to the strengths and weaknesses section of the SWOT analysis. And the tool that I use to help me to think about that is something called a 7S analysis. And this is a tool, it's not my tool, it was originally created by Peters and Waterman when they were doing research for In Search of Excellence, which is a really interesting business book. And this is a great tool for looking inside your business and really understanding what your strengths and what your weaknesses are. And it's great because it looks at so many different elements. There are 7 different elements that it encourages you to look at, and they're each represented by an initial S. So the middle one is a little bit contrived slightly in a way. And again, I'm going to show you what one looks like so you get an idea. So I generally start a 7S analysis in the middle by thinking about our shared values. And I do that because most of the settings that I work with, I find have a really good sense of your vision, your ethos, perhaps your goals and aspirations, and, you know, really understanding what it is that really matters to you as a setting, what I call your stick of rock. So, you know, if you imagine your setting were a stick of rock off the beach, and you sliced it, what would be the key message going all the way through it? So do you have a really clear ethos? And more importantly, is that shared with everybody so that every member of staff also buys into that ethos? Is it written down somewhere, or is it just in the owner's head? So it's really important to understand that. So in my example that I've worked through, I've said this particular setting, they do have a clear ethos, but it's in the owner's head, and it's not really well understood by the staff. So they've got work to do there. That's perhaps a strength partly, but also a weakness. You can then move to strategy. So strategy is about, do you have something setting out how the business will actually deliver that ethos and those values? So this is like your business plan. So is there a business plan that sets out how we're going to operate in delivering that ethos to our parents, to our customers, and to the children? So you're going to determine what you do currently as far as that's concerned. And is that a strength currently, or is there a bit of a gap there, a bit of a weakness there? The next one I'll mention is structure. So how are you structured? What are your premises like? Are they fit for purpose? Do they actually meet your future needs as you've set out in your business strategy? Or actually, is it not really going to help? You know, you're a bit limited. You can't really expand and do the things you want to be able to do. Then systems. So what systems and processes do you use to operate on a day-to-day basis? So this might also be called operations. So what are your operational systems, and which of those work really well, and which of them perhaps are not so strong? So in the setting example I've given here, they've got lots of systems that work really well for them, but that they've acknowledged that they're not really good at doing any marketing in a systematic way and building relationships with parents. So that's perhaps an area of weakness that they need to work on. The next S is about staff. So this is about recognizing what the shape of your staffing is. And usually it's a bit of a hierarchy where you've got manager and a deputy and team leaders, room leaders, and other practitioners, seniors, maybe, depending on the size of your setting. So again, this is asking yourself the question, is it fit for purpose? Is it as we need it to be in order to deliver our current and future business strategy? So you're constantly referring back to the strategy that you've put into place. So is that, again, is that a strength, or have you got gaps in your staffing that you need to fill? The next one is very closely linked to that, and this is about the skills that you have within the business. So within your staff, do people have the right skills, the right knowledge, the right qualifications to sustain your business now and in the future? And again, that might be a strength or a weakness. And then the last one is about style. So this is about really getting a sense of the feel of your setting. How does it feel to be a member of staff working in your setting? How does it feel to be a parent bringing their child to your setting? How does it feel to be a child who spends time in your setting? So again, this is where you might want to look back at your strategy, look back at your ethos. You know, if your ethos says we want to be creating a home from home environment, well, does it feel like that? Is that what it actually feels like? Or if your strategy is to create something that feels much more like an early education centre, does it feel like that to everybody that's involved in it? So you'll see from your early years 7S analysis that you've had a good look both inside and outside of the business. Over the next few slides, I've given you a few additional tips of some of the things that you might want to be thinking about. So some tips there about your premises and thinking about, you know, is it fit for the future going forward? You know, do you need more space? What does that space look like? Do you need to be thinking about something different? Could you use your premises more flexibly? Thinking a bit more about your structure. You think about how you use your time as part of your structure. So to what extent do your current business hours actually hinder your future business strategy? Do you need to think about starting to extend your day or extend the days of the week that you do, or even the weeks of the year, move from term time into a full-time situation? Do you need to think about how you structure your delivery models? So remember, you know, the 30 hours criteria are very broad in terms of how you deliver. They don't set out you've got to deliver X hours at different times. So it's useful to think about your menus that you offer to your parents of how they utilize their funded hours in balance with your fee paying hours. So offer a bit more of kind of set menus rather than a kind of they can pick what hours they want funded, because that doesn't really work very well for most settings. So offer some packages that say they can take their funded hours every afternoon, for example, if your afternoons are quieter for your fee paying children, or they can take more of their funded hours, say on a Thursday and Friday when you know you're not going to have as many of your fee paying children. So offer some set menus. And then your systems. So think about all of those systems that you've got in place within your business. Don't leave anything out, and, you know, think about what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses, what works well and what actually needs to be improved. Your staff, think about how your staff is made up. What's your structure? What are your numbers? How many of them are full-time, part-time? Do you need to rely on agency staff or volunteers? What sort of people? Have you got the right sort of people in the right positions? Have you got the right skills to actually manage and deliver your services? And think about how you get people into your business. How do you recruit them? How do you manage them? How do you motivate them? How do you reward them and development? That all of that is part of that whole piece around staff and skills. And then finally, that whole way you behave. How do you create that feel that is in line with your ethos? And that's very much about the culture of your business. Okay, so that's a tool for doing the inside look. And again, your question mark here, when you've done all of that piece of work, is, well, so what do you do about that now? And what's really important is, again, you ask yourself those two key questions, same questions as last time. So having done your 7S analysis, what are our greatest strengths? What are those things that we're really good at? And it's important to recognize those. Sometimes we can get very overwhelmed with focusing on the weaknesses, but it's important to recognize your strengths as well, because they are going to form your foundations from which everything else grows. So if you understand what your strengths are, you can ask yourself that question: what should we be doing today, right now, to ensure that we build on our strengths and use them as a firm foundation for the future? And then the second question, so those weaknesses, this is not about getting overwhelmed by them, but again about asking that question: what should we be doing now, today, in order to eliminate our weaknesses? So this is about planning for improvement. So having completed your PESTLE and your 7S analysis and asked yourself those key questions about our strengths, our weaknesses, our opportunities, and our threats, we can then use that information to build our SWOT analysis. And as well as those tools, we perhaps want to feed some other things into our SWOT analysis as well. So as an example, if we've done some financial forecasting, we might want to add that into our strengths and weaknesses. So once we've done some financial forecasting, and I'll be covering that in the second webinar of this series, then we might realize that actually there are some strengths and there are some weaknesses in terms of our finances, and we could pop those into our SWOT analysis. Have we done a break-even calculation? Again, we'll be covering this next time, working out whether we're actually covering our costs. And that may be either a strength or a weakness for us. Have we done some market research? So do we understand what our customers are looking for, our parents and prospective parents that we are hoping to attract in the future? And are we delivering the sort of things that they're saying that they want? So that may be a strength or a weakness. And how do we stack up in terms of our competitors? So have we done a bit of competitor research to find out what it is that we offer and compare that with our competitors and see whether we're actually, whether we're actually doing things better than others may be. And finally, a stakeholder analysis. So a stakeholder analysis is simply a way of looking at all the various people and organizations that may have an interest in what happens within our setting. So that would include obviously parents and children and staff, but we'll also include outside bodies. We'll include a committee if you have a committee, or governors, but we'll also include Ofsted, we'll include your local authority team, might include a neighbouring school, might include your competitors, because they're certainly interested in you just as you're interested in them. So do a bit of a stakeholder analysis to understand whether how you're seen by other people is actually a strength or a weakness. You'll find some templates for all of these various tools to accompany this series of webinars on the C-Zone. with some explanatory guidance notes also of how you can make use of those tools and templates within your setting. So I very much encourage you to have a go at utilising those. So once you've created your SWOT, what happens next? Well, something drops out of the bottom of this, and this is what I call a risk register. So once you've completed your SWOT and built all of that information into it from all those different sources, you should get a really firm sense of what you need to focus your attention on. And this is what we mean by a risk register. So a risk register will help you to focus on the actions that you need to take in order, first of all, to preserve or enhance or build on your strengths. Once you really understand what your strengths are, you can make use of those and capitalize them. It will help you to work out the actions that you need to take in order to reduce or eliminate your weaknesses. It will help you to think about what are some of the opportunities out there that perhaps you should be taking advantage over the next couple of years. And it will help you to work out what actions you need to start taking now in order to take advantage of those opportunities. And finally, it will help you to know how to act to eliminate or mitigate those threats or risks. So again, you'll find a template that I've put together that's on the C zone, and you'll find that it enables you to create a proper action plan of how you're actually going to deal with what you've identified as a result of completing your SWOT analysis. So this is very much your business Sat Nav. So as with your Sat Nav, you've put your goal in to start with, you've made it smart, putting your postcode in by actually smartening up those goals and making them much more specific and measurable and time bound. And then you created an action plan using your SWOT analysis and your risk register to basically plot your journey in terms of the actions you need to take to get you from where you are now to where you plan to be at a point in the future. So I wish you well in setting your Sat Nav going forward to support your journey. So in terms of some next steps to do that, have a look on the C Zone, find the East Sussex business plan template, have a little look at the Hempsells business map and start to familiarise yourself with some of their tools, which we'll be looking at in more detail in the next webinar. Download the various tools and templates that I've covered today and the guidance notes as well, and then have a go at using them. So decide who's best placed to actually do this for your setting. It might be your committee. It might be the manager with some key members of the management team. You might want to engage more of your staff in this process, as some of it can be really useful, particularly that 7S analysis where we're talking about what works in the setting and what doesn't. Getting your staff input into some of that is really, really valuable and very engaging for them in terms of engaging them with the future of the business. So before you have a go at the next webinar, have a go at using some of those tools and templates, and I hope you find those useful. So in terms of what happens next, the next webinars in the series that really all fit together as a series of 3, you'll find that there is one on financial forecasting and budgeting, and that one I would recommend that you view next. And I will be referring to in much more detail to those tools and templates that we've referred to already today in terms of the financial planning and budgeting tools, and I'll be talking you through those. The third one in the series then looks at how you make use on a day-to-day basis of the tools that you've then started to use through the first 2 webinars. Because it's all very well creating a business plan, but if you put it in a drawer and never look at it, that's not really very useful. It's all very well creating a financial forecast and budget, but if you never open the spreadsheet and look at it and use it to work with on a day-to-day basis, then that's a bit of a waste of time. It's like having your Sat Nav and putting it in your glove compartment. Not much use to you there. So this is really our series of 3, which we would encourage you to complete. The next one on financial forecasting and budgeting, and the third one on managing business and financial performance on a day-to-day basis. There are a couple of additional webinars that I've produced, which may or may not be relevant to you. One is on preparing for a committee handover, which is obviously relevant to you, particularly if you are a committee-run setting. And the final one is aimed at childminders, which looks at this business planning process from a childminder's point of view. So that brings us to an end of today's webinar. I look forward to speaking to you again on webinar number 2 shortly. And in the meantime, I've been Jacqui Burke from Flourishing People. So goodbye for now.